did a good job.
We had to keep our faces
Remind
right
people,
on.
yeah,
Huh?
remind people to speak into the microphone.
You mean we've got the way too nervous.
We should have been a long time ago. I can't believe we haven't been. It's ridiculous. This room is already set up for it.
How are you today, Robert?
Very good.
Excellent.
Did you print any copies at all, Kenny? So, because we don't have any minutes?
Huh?
We don't have any minutes?
No.
I spent time at Berkeley. Both sons were there.
Who was there?
Both of my sons.
Sweet.
So that was very nice.
Did you see my email?
Oh, I did. I saw it like 20 minutes ago.
That's okay. Just think about it.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Yes.
I think you'd be really good.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you have a lot of
Oh yeah. I think
If you want-
everyone does, right? Don't we all?
You know what they say, if you want to get something done, ask somebody who's really busy.
Uh-huh.
Not some retiree that
I have heard that.
goofs off most of the
Well, my
time.
husband and I both retired and we're busier than we
I
ever
was gonna
were,
say,
so-
yeah, I don't know a lot of retired people who haven't become really busy with other stuff.
Well, I'm busy with other stuff. I just got
But
off the
anyway,
San
thank you.
Juan.
Oh, how
That
was
was-
it? I've only
I
been
love
like
San Juan.
Oh, the
spring
temperatures
and
were
summer.
perfect. The flows were great. The water was
Really? What was it running?
like 1,200,
Oh wow, that is great. For a
and it
fall
was
trip.
clear water, and it was cold.
Oh, that's lovely.
It was like
Just
all perfect.
so pretty.
We went, the first time that we went, my husband and I, he had a raft and he was the support boat for inflatables.
Yeah.
And so we had all of the camping and all the food. Well, the couple who paid for everything, wanted us to build the support vehicle, the one had an older sister and she just got too tired rowing. So she got on the raft and I got in. And we figured out what her problem was, is she had a watermelon in it, and it was the watermelon, and so it was making it hard.
Like,
You know what we did?
every
We
time
took
you move the boat.
the watermelon out and set it in the river, let it float with us. We just watched it.
Just
It was
keep
nice
an
and
eye on
cold.
it.
We had it for dinner that night. But anyway, I'm like extremely afraid of rapids because I've watched way too many people flip in whites and not come up till they come around the corner. So I like don't like rapids. I want something big. I just am. And that was our entertainment when we were kids. We'd like at the window and see rafts coming. We'd just jump in the truck and my dad would drive. We'd all hang off the tailgate and we'd go down there and we'd watch all these people go through. And that was our evening entertainment. But anyway, and Kid told me that he'd get me out before that big rapid. I can't even think of what the name of it is. It's on the corner.
Oh, on the San Juan
Uh-huh.
government?
Yes.
maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, the river was high. And
Well,
we
that's
come,
8 foot on the upper part.
I don't know. We come around that corner. I think it was government, but I
No,
don't know.
government uses pretty much a straight shot. But
Okay, it was
8 foot.
corner. It was
Yeah.
corner. I come around that corner, and I was rowing nice and slow, and I could hear it getting louder, and I thought, oh, I think we're going to, and I looked over, and Dick Rose, who we were with, and he sold us the sweeties, he was a Gold State, he was on the bank, because he didn't think we'd swim out. My husband said I looked like I was in a motorboat. And I just shot over the top of the rapids all the way to the bottom, and he says, I thought you had a motor on the back. I was so scared.
Not going down.
But I made it. I was probably about
Not slowing
26 years
down.
old, man, and I just like, he says, I just would have bet money you had a motor in there somewhere. It was fun. It was so much fun. After I got over the fear, I might have enjoyed it if I wasn't just, it's just that fear you have, you know?
Yeah, well, from a young age, that makes a strong impression watching people.
Yeah.
Well, I would never drive Razor up Hell's Revenge, so
Yeah,
you know,
me
there are certain
either.
things that I'm
That
scared
scares
of.
me so much. But, I'm a person who I've gotten out of the Jeep and watched other people do the scary parts because I'm like, I can't even be in the car.
So we don't have minutes glad she decided to stay home.
Yeah, I don't want it.
don't-
That's what I
we
was
don't all
thinking,
wanna
please
Or she
don't
would come
come.
with a full surgical gown, with, like the
Face
mask
mask.
and the face mask and everything.
Actually, one of those bubble suits, that you can't breathe out what she
Yep.
brought in, yeah, I
Yep.
was thinking, please don't come. That was when I was the manager, when I worked at Telecom, and that's the one thing I won't tolerate, nobody comes to work sick, I don't want it.
Yep.
Stay home.
Okay, we had a reminder from the IT department that we should be speaking into these microphones. I don't know that this was going to be a trial first run.
My question exactly.
Kevin, you
I,
can talk directly with him about it.
I just thought
I'm
you
not
might
going to try to
already know.
translate. I don't know.
I'm gonna use
I'm glad it's
I'll
getting
use
together,
logical,
though.
logic with you to try to get you to talk into the microphone. Just because the commissioners don't.
So Cricket is going to be our microphone policewoman.
It's because I've had to do it recently. Yeah, there
Yeah.
are.
Okay. All right, so we don't have any meeting minutes, so let's move on to citizens to be heard. Are there any citizens here who have anything that they would like to talk to us about that is not on the agenda? Okay, we'll move on then. Does anyone have a conflict of interest, or have they had ex parte communications about anything that is on our agenda tonight?
No.
No.
Okay. Okay, Kenny, if you're ready, we will entertain the Murphy Flats edition. Come on up, Courtney, and have a seat.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, Matt did tell me we are live, so yeah, just be aware.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
About time.
Yeah, and it sounds like from now on we'll be live on the internet and have that to fall back on. So that'll be nice. Yeah. So I after coming back from vacation, am getting caught up still a little bit, but Courtney, this is Courtney's requesting some input on an addition to the high density housing overlay that she came to us with a little while ago. Basically, this would just be there's a front. That parcel directly in front of her, it's 1.04 acres, located at 1185, I believe is the address.
Yes.
Just directly in front of her. So I think with that, Courtney might be able to speak a little bit better. One thing we did notice in reviewing it was that I believe you had requested 17 lot or 17 units, and the parcel size and the high density housing overlay, the HDH 15 would only allow for 16. So that was one of our comments, and then you had also wanted to request some input on parking. So, Kevin.
I just had a sort of a math comment on the number of units. So first, in the packet, when you came up with 16, you were sort of that should be rounded down. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
What we were looking at was just that one parcel.
But
So,
I do think it's important in the future that it's, it's the lowest fraction above. I mean, I think that's the way the law is written, so.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with that, I don't have too much more to say about it.
Okay, Courtney, before
Any other
you
questions?
get started with your presentation, I do have a couple of questions. One was, what was the resolution, if any, with the steepness of the driveway or the roadway and the turnaround area for fire What?
Road department and fire department.
Yeah.
They had a meeting with the fire department today.
She probably needs the microphone so people can hear her.
Should be working, I think. Yeah.
And
Thank
same
you, Courtney.
thing, we all believe that we can come to a solution. We're just not far enough along the process to say definitively this is the best solution. But across the board, we all agree that there are solutions to be had, and we just need to pick one that works the best with the financing and the site and what we already have planned. And the fire department has offered, they might even be able to come and join us at one of these meetings in the future, maybe the next one if you were to vote on this, so they can answer some of your questions as well.
That would be great.
Drainage. Drainage.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's just an issue. When we're talking about county standards, gradients of streets and turnarounds, that's up, if the fire department is okay with trying to get a fire truck up, or if there's a mitigation that you're going to put a hydrant or something, whatever you were. I just wanted to know if there was a resolution yet.
So our plan with this larger development, which is a different set of circumstances than the singular development, we would, as we were originally planning, sprinkle the units. We're discussing either a hydrant at the middle tier or a water tank, dedicated water just for firefighting use, which is another solution they've used at projects around town. So one of those two solutions are probably what we're going to do for water. As far as the road gradient goes, we're in compliance, 12%, period, the end. We're good there.
But the existing driveway is over 16%.
That's correct, in certain places.
So
when
what-
we grade out the whole road, it comes to 12% the entire length of the road. There's no part that's not in compliance with the county standards
Those some parts are 16%.
currently, not in the proposed.
Okay, great.
Yeah, in the proposed plan, we are in compliance.
And then what about the turnaround, the fire turnaround
So
radius?
For the existing plan that we had drawn, that middle tier was what we were planning to use. However, now that we're talking about a larger development, our new scheme is to have one turnaround at the top tier and one turnaround at the bottom tier. And they'd both be of the hammerhead varietal.
And that would meet the county standard?
Yes.
Thank you.
And so the plans that are in the packet right now, are those showing both of those, or are these the older plans showing just one?
These are the older plans showing just one. Yeah, so if we were to come to you for a vote, we would definitely revise that so you can see the two turnarounds. But I just want to be absolutely clear, we are not going to propose anything without the input of the fire department. Because we do feel just as strongly, I think, as everybody on this board, that that is of the utmost importance. Are there any other questions I can answer off the bat?
No, go ahead with give us your rationale for parking.
Okay, so actually right now, we are proposing the same number of parking spaces that are required by the code. We'd love to discuss that further. It's a lot of paved or impervious coverage, and if y'all are open to reducing that, we sure are on board with that too. But if that's just off the table, then we'll just keep going the direction we're headed on. But I think the most important thing is discussing the fact that this development would be in totality. So just like you said, Kevin, the density that's being proposed is as a portion of the whole lot, both lots put together. Same thing with the parking. So what that means is by adding this lower lot, we're able to get up to the maximums. And the important part about this across the board is something that none of us like to talk about. And it's the fact that at the end of the day, we have to get this project financed. When we talk about just the upper lot, we are of little interest to the financing banks that are available. They're still willing to consider it, but it's not a slam dunk, and we may not be able to make it happen. This lower lot, because the infrastructure costs are able to be split up between more units, it looks a lot better on paper, and we have a lot better chances of getting the financing that we need to build the project.
So the lower lot is the lot that the owners
That wa-
came and talked to us about, and they live down below, and the easement for the driveway goes through their property?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
So-
so they approached us and offered us the lot to buy.
Mhm.
And just to be clear, when you said the financing works out better, that's for the combining the two lots or just the lower lot by itself has?
Combining the two
Okay.
lots. No, we definitely own the top lot, and we're going to do something with that one regardless. But this one just makes it more feasible that we can actually turn this into a housing project.
So in the packet, you had a lot of figures and comparisons with other towns about parking. Are you planning on talking about that, or are you, I mean, I would be interested to hear it.
Basically, the long and short story behind those figures is we have, as a community, required a great number of parking spaces per unit in comparison to other towns that are moving towards a more sustainable direction. And I'm just curious if that's something that we're open to yet, if that's on the table, if we can have that discussion, or if in order to get these approvals, we just have to propose the right number of parking spaces. So it's a question for all of you.
Well, my answer is I'm certainly open to reconsidering those parking things. I don't think when we were drafting the HDH, we put a huge amount of thought into them. I remember a little bit of discussion, but I don't think we systematically compared to other communities, which you've done in your letter, and I think that's useful information. I also think we only took, I guess we took bedrooms into account, but not like overall square footage. And I think that's the point you raised, that if you've got a unit that's 2 bedrooms, but it's got less square footage than a typical 1-bedroom, that's probably on average not going to have as much of a need for parking spaces. Just
Why
'cause
would
on-
that be, Kevin?
Just because on average, there's less opportunities for doubling up or fewer people in it.
Yeah, if it's a smaller unit, fewer people would be living in it, which means fewer cars.
I mean, that's averaged over, if you have 20 of them side by side, some might be exactly the same.
Like, it's more appealing to be a one-person unit than a couple unit or 2 roommates because of the size. So that would be more likelihood of 1 car,
And
right?
I mean, I thought it was terrifically informative, nice comparison with other communities. At some point, I don't know, but I never can read the page numbers on these things, but I think it's around page 58 is, at least off my computer, reading it was I've got it right, 37 units and 4 spaces reserved for guest parking. And, my thought of, if I come from Moab, which I would, if not Moab, from Castle Valley, as I would, I probably wouldn't bring a bike, park somewhere, and go there and wondering if that's enough guest spaces. It was my one probably big concern, and I can even imagine the terrible thing of 2 family members coming to visit in one small house just to see someone. So that was a little bit of a concern to me.
Because is it right that any parking along Murphy Lane is prohibited, and so there isn't any access to any public street parking?
That's correct.
Uh-huh.
But I think that's because I think that's an argument in favor of
Right. It
fewer
wouldn't
spaces because
have a
there's not the danger of
neighborhood
the
impact.
overflow.
That's not a problem.
And I think that was one of our big concerns, is that, if a development didn't have enough parking spaces, then they would start utilizing other places, which is maybe not desirable. But in some places like this, that's maybe not a concern because you're not allowed to park on Murphy.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a concern. I mean, we often disagree about parking, Kevin. But I see all the people who come into town, who move to town, and they've got multiple vehicles and trailers. And I know that you can't really say that this is going to be an exclusive, young person, bike-friendly, because you wouldn't get anywhere if you came out and said that. But so I think we need to plan on this being a typical residential area and provide for adequate parking for the anticipated occupants' use and their guests. So let Cricket go, and then you can take a stab at me.
Well, my biggest concern about the parking is it's not even close to town. It's not walking distance. And granted, it's not that far, but it's walking along two dangerous roads. Murphy Lane, I wouldn't want to walk along Murphy Lane, and I surely wouldn't want to walk along Spanish Valley Drive. That's a main thoroughfare, and people are driving fast. So to me, that's not even, it's not like it's like 2 blocks off Main Street. This is quite a ways out, and I think reducing parking is short-sighted. I realize that this is a really great thing, but I don't think that we should cut corners and try to help them out so this happens, because this is too far from town, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I guess my response on the parking, similar to our previous discussions about parking, but maybe hopefully more convincing this time. We don't, some people have like a lot of kids or a lot of family members otherwise, and some people live in one-person households. And we could say, well, all units have to have at least 2 bedrooms or at least 3 because, some people have a lot of people in their house. But that would be a mistake. And instead what we do is we let the developers decide how many bedrooms they're going to build. And if they want to build something that consists entirely of 1 bedroom, that's their kind of economic choice. I mean, I don't think that the Planning Commission and the County Council is going to do a better job of judging the market than developers whose money is on the line with these things. And I think exactly the same thing goes with garages. Do you want to cover garage or not? Well, some people do, some people don't. And I say let the developers decide whether they want to include them. And I think it's similar with parking spaces. We could set a minimum so that it's not a disaster, prevent developers from making a really bad mistake. But I think you're right. Some people want a lot of parking spaces, some people don't. And if I'm someone who has 1 car and is never going to want more than 1 parking space, I wouldn't want to have to pay for, 2 or whatever, that I'm not going to use just because the Planning Commission is, so I don't think it's really our place to make those decisions unless,
Well, I see parking as being a different thing altogether from whether you have a garage or a carport or open-air parking.
number of bedrooms.
Or the number of bedrooms. I see that as totally something that is up to the developer and let the market decide. What I would be concerned about is allowing this or another development to go forward with less than adequate parking and end up with unintended consequences. I mean, the expectation here is that people will be riding their bikes back and forth to town up a 12% grade after going up a 11% grade.
You said less-
That may be the case. Maybe most of the people will be bike commuters. I don't know. But when we're looking at developments, I think we need to put blinders on to the intended occupants and look at it as a standalone new development proposal. And we have standards that I don't know that are necessarily even adequate dealing with parking as it is.
So you mentioned adequate parking, but I mean, there's a question about, what's so magic about, two spaces per 2-bedroom unit or 1.5 spaces per studio. Other towns do it differently. And so, we shouldn't think that our numbers are carved in stone if we go even 2 spaces
Well,
less.
if
it's
the
gonna be
comparisons
disaster.
that we were looking at were places that have a big toy component to people's lifestyles, I would say look at Silverton, Colorado, or look at a place that has people have a lot of boats and trailers, and don't look at the metropolitan areas that were looked at in this analysis, which is basically inner city type living. Look at comparative properties or comparative towns that are very similar to what we experience here in Moab.
But they looked at Flagstaff and Grand Junction and Helena. I mean, that's not like comparing it to Manhattan. I think those are more in the absence of actual evidence. I feel like there's probably a lot of boats, a lot of Jeeps, a lot of things in those communities too. I mean, they seem like more outdoorsy places.
I would just say that a nice thing in this proposal is this leasing of parking spaces. So this isn't really to argue with you, Kevin, but it's to say people who want that second space are going to have to pay for it, which is interesting. Still, probably my worry was what happens with guests.
And I would also say, as the person that's gonna be running this development, I have no interest in allowing people to park their trailers and boats on our property
But how are you going to keep them out? That's the problem.
with our leases.
By not having parking spaces available, that's how you keep them out.
What do you mean by with your lease?
So when we allow somebody to lease from us,
Yes.
we can very easily write into the lease that trailers are not allowed to be parked on the property. Even with HOAs, that's a really common thing, that RVs or boats or whatever can't be parked in
Well,
this,
it's
in this subdivision, and that is
That-
definitely our
yeah.
intent. If you have toys, you are more than welcome to store them at one of the storage facilities in town.
That does seem like that addresses
Yeah, it does.
your concern
Yeah.
in a meaningful way.
And my thought there is we're always saying, well, they say that, but it could change, so the ownership could change. And the ownership could rewrite everything, and then would be short parking spaces. So, I mean, if we're going to say we can't control that, we need to realize that just because that's her dream, doesn't mean that the next owner's going to have the same dream.
Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I would say if the development agreement doesn't address that, I would recommend that the county go back and look at that. And if they're going to control the amount of parking, additional parking besides in my opinion, the standard, they're going to control that through the lease that the development agreement should state.
Set it aside or draw it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Set it in stone. It's a covenant.
yeah.
Because
I think,
Because the next thing is, we're gonna be the same thing, well, they said, and then you're gonna have all the neighbors, and somebody has a birthday party, or Christmas Eve, or New Year's Eve party, and you're gonna have people parking in the gutter, I can bet you money, or in the other people's driveways, and so then they're gonna be an unintended, and it won't be often, but if there's not enough parking spaces, and I mean, I realize this is a cool project, but I think we gotta, not see the big picture. And another thing is, like what you're saying, we set this in stone, then somebody else will say, well, you did it for them. We want to do this too. And so you're going to have a wave, trickle out effect.
Well, do you want to suggest that we have them write prohibition on
Well,
parties in the
No,
lease agreement?
no, I'm just trying to think
No, I know
outside
what
the
you-
box. I'm looking beyond
of-
what's being said,
different
I
circumstances.
worked for a title company, I had to imagine what we could get in trouble for that we weren't thinking about, and that's what I do.
So I think the main 2 points, so the first point, the thing about guest parking, I think is a valid concern. We have guests do sometimes come, and that's true in any development, and so I think that's valid. The point about, some people have trailers, so everybody should have to pay for extra parking spaces, I think that's just crazy. And I don't want to, if I'm someone who doesn't have a need for extra parking, I don't want to have to pay, my prices go up because some other people do. The same way I don't want to have to pay for a 3-bedroom apartment if I only need 1 bedroom.
Well, it's
And
like if you moved in there, you would need 2 parking spaces, or you'd have to get rid of a vehicle.
Yeah.
You
So,
get
so I would,
one.
if I'm shopping around, I would only shop at places that give me at least 2 parking spaces. Either that or plan on using one of the, there's plenty of places to store a vehicle if you're not going to use it often. So I think that's fine. And there's nothing, I think most of the developments coming here, they're probably going to want to offer more parking spaces, but that doesn't mean we need to force every single one to. And different developers have different visions for the type of community. And so I think it's completely legitimate for it, not to have a one-size-fits-all parking policy. The second main point is, we talk about adequate parking and the correct number of spaces. I think she's put more thought in this than we did when we came up with those numbers. And I think these comparisons with other communities, many of which, as was pointed out, are kind of similar to ours in terms of being semi-rural western towns. We should pay attention to that. And so I'm not so confident that the numbers of parking spaces we set out there, are based on sound reasoning. So, it's, we might want to look at it in the face of new information.
Well, I like the idea if an HOA can control the parking of trailers and RVs and that sort of thing, that maybe we should look at that in the future as a way of alleviating some of my concern about the adequacy of parking.
I think that would be something to have Zachariah and Kenny talk to the county attorney to even see if that's a possibility. I mean, because is that an overstep? I mean, just let's look at that, make sure that's even not gonna get us in trouble legally, that we're saying. So I think I definitely run that by the county attorney and get an
Yeah,
opinion.
what I'm thinking is potentially the county would require fewer parking places if the HOA prohibited certain types of vehicle storage.
Well, and I get that, but I'm just saying we probably should
Yeah,
look at the legality of that. Let's
Uh-huh.
don't,
And then I just had a couple comments. I mean, I think that this could fall into that, there's a range of development types in the community, and so, this could be one for people who have fewer possessions, for example. I do know that, where there is in town a bike-in community with limited parking, and I have a bunch of friends who live there, the stories are hilarious about the issues they have with parking.
I'm guessing
For
Mrs.
the-
Mulberry?
Yes, for their allotted 2 slots. So, and that's sort of supposed to be, this alternative type of community. And I would say that the parking there just almost doesn't work, the limited parking. But I would agree with, and I agree with Cricket about, if there's a change of ownership, that's what we have to plan for, basically. So if there's some way to assure that. But the other question I had is, and I don't know how this would fit in there, but because the parking spaces don't have to be, impervious surfaces, I don't know if there's some way to just
Like a
maybe
gravel
even
lot.
allow for, if we grant fewer parking spaces, allow for a potential expansion, maybe this is a separate space that could be slated one day for extra parking, I don't know, you could use it as something else, like it could be open space.
That's a great idea, because then if we find that there are issues, we
Yeah.
have a backup in mind and in place to utilize if necessary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just personal experience as well from renting properties, as parking has always been an issue, even with people who work in the bike industry and supposedly bike to work every day. I mean, some of them own like 3 cars, so it's just, it's a different kind of town maybe than,
well, it's a long way from here to there, wherever you're going.
Yeah.
yeah, if people go into a development like this with their eyes open and they know that, okay, I've got these things that are going to have to go to storage, and so that's going to basically increase my monthly expenses by $100 or whatever they charge. As long as they know that going in, it's kind of a buyer beware sort of thing.
And part of our goal too is to maintain our rent levels between the 100 and 120% of AMI. And we'd hate to just keep saying yes to things or keep just following the status quo and getting to a point where we have to raise the rent price to make it pencil out. So we're finding that it's like a give take. We want the whole world, and at the end of the day, some of it doesn't work on paper. But I think that could be a really good happy medium if we work on the development agreement to make sure that we're being aware of what type of vehicles are parking there, and that way it's written in stone in perpetuity along with the HDHO overlay. And then also I love the idea of having contingency spaces that maybe are landscaped right now, but they're there if we find them. It needs to be.
Does anybody remember, is there a requirement that parking spaces have to be pavement? It seems to me when we were working on remember allowing like RV pads to be put in with sanitary, and
I don't think there is a requirement.
there wasn't a requirement. It could have been gravelled.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I
That's
think-
what I remember.
Especially up on the slope where you are, and the number of impervious surfaces you're going to be building, that anything that you can do, if it's parking or anything else that you can do to help mitigate some of the flooding problems down on Murphy Lane would be really good.
And that's actually our plan, and it turns out that we're able to do the whole thing. The main driveway is chip and seal, and then we're able to use gravel for the spaces as well. but unfortunately, it creates the same sheet flows as pervious asphalt. Like, so it behaves exactly the same as. Yeah.
That's because you use road base rather than just gravel.
Yeah. And even just gravel ends up being
Oh, does it?
pervious too. Yeah.
Yeah, the engineer looks at the impervious or gravel as impervious area, and his reasoning that, or his explanation for me about that is because over time it begins to act like and gets compacted, probably just, you know, in the long run, possibly just as much.
My
So,
driveway did.
Yeah.
My driveway was deep gravel and now it's like a solid road. So, yeah.
Has the engineer suggested any additional drainage mitigation to you?
So I'm not sure if we had discussed this the last time that we chatted, but there is a very soon to come drainage plan on Murphy Lane. So the plan that we are working towards was tying into that underground drainage. So instead of just dumping the water into the gutters on the drainage swells on either side of the road, we'd actually be tying into that system. But again, same thing, we're working really closely, our engineer is with the county engineer to make sure that everything's in line. And they've had the same feedback for us so far, that yes, there's still things that we need to iron out before we come to a plat or site plan review, whichever one it is, but nothing insurmountable. Okay, I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that I wanted y'all's feedback on. Let me just look at my notes real quick. Did y'all have any other major concerns based on what you've been looking at so far? The one other thing that I wanted to discuss with y'all, we had talked about the public easement in the past, and we did a little more looking into that, and as much as I want to offer that, we're concerned about the overflow of parking and what that would do to affect the development and also the surrounding neighborhoods. Because we're watching what's happening at the Mill Creek parking area, and people just ignore the signs and they park wherever they want. And I think it's one of those situations where it's not my town, I don't live here, I don't care, I'm just coming for the day. So that's what we're concerned about. We're still open to the discussion, but that's what we've been warned against, and the more we started thinking about it, we're like, actually, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think what was envisioned was people from the neighborhood would still be able to walk up that road and access public land.
So is that something we're allowed to do? Are we allowed to create an access easement for the public and just not sign it so that unless you
Yeah,
know
of course.
it's there?
I live near one that, you know, exists on, you wouldn't know on the ground that it's there, but, you know, a dozen people who live nearby know it's there and they use it to access BLM land. So I
'Cause
think the
otherwise-
comparison,
So you have a trail system kind of tying all your buildings together, and it eventually accesses the rim. So I suppose you could put up no trespassing signs if you didn't want the general public or your neighbors to be accessing public land through your property.
Then you're shooting the foot what he wants.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying that's the extreme would be no trespassing signs.
but I think you were making the comparison to, you know, Lower Mill Creek, which is very atypical because it's well-known and there's a lot of water and all this stuff. There's multiple other, well, not as many as there should be, but there are other accesses like in the Highland neighborhood and Navajo Ridge that see much, much less traffic. I don't think there's any parking issues near those. And it's, you know, because it's not near water, it doesn't offer, and I think yours will be the same. If someone wants to go to Mill Creek, they're not going to go, you know, you're sort of giving people access to the rim trail system. And it's,
We're half a mile from the Mill Creek Trail.
you know, but it's, you know, getting down there is not so, you know, I just don't think it's convenient from there.
Yeah, walk that half mile sometime.
I watch it every day.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
My concern, if I were you, is I would talk to my insurance company,
Okay.
make sure that it wouldn't be a problem that you had that, since you already have all the other. If you create a public walkway where people are walking across your property.
I think she's indemnified by state law that
Okay.
says if you allow recreational access to your property and you do not charge.
Okay. That would just be my
You
concern.
could check that.
That would be my concern.
That's a good point to
Somebody
bring up.
falls down and blames you, kind of thing. Or somebody's walking and somebody backs out and, you know.
Okay, but
Just-
it sounds like maybe there's something in place. We'll dig into that and see if we can find that. Because if that's the case, then absolutely a non-signed public access easement so that the neighbors can.
Yeah, and in the short term, I think right now the neighbors are using, the traditional access goes through other pieces of private property. But at any moment, those owners, could shut it off. And so this would be sort of, Plan B or Plan C if there's no other alternatives. So I don't, but I guess my general concern is that, access to public lands is important, and, we, as a county, we have limited opportunities to grab an easement. We're not gonna go use eminent domain to create a bunch of them. And so when an opportunity like this comes up, I just like for us to jump on it.
And that does seem in line with what we've asked from other developments that have similar
Yep.
public land access,
Yeah, no,
like traditional public land access that people in the neighborhood have used.
Yeah, the good thing that concerns me is that there may have been some approvals given by the county for developments where it wasn't brought up as
They didn't do this voluntarily. I've been walking through the property, and they wanted the subdivision. The county says, well, if you want your subdivision, you're gonna have to, build a couple of paths, which they did. And I don't think anyone complains about them now.
And I think my last question is are you all comfortable with using the density and the parking requirements for the entirety of both lots? Or are you wanting to see them separate and only the density for the lower lot?
Can you tell us what the plans are for the lower lot?
Yes, yeah, and they actually are in your packet. So it's the same small buildings just scattered around the existing house.
Residences?
Residences, yeah.
So the main house stays?
Main house stays.
My general feeling is that the two proposals should be standalone. And the reason is that the upper development that you proposed to us already it's going to be difficult to plan for parking for people down below to access those. I think we'll end up with a similar situation as Mulberry Grove that Rachel was talking about. So my personal feeling is separate them out and have adequate parking for each.
Well, she was asking more generally, and I think if you've got two adjacent pieces of property with the same developer, then it should be treated as one development. I mean, to me, that just sort of seems like a no-brainer. I mean, it's consistent.
Well, does she have one development proposed now or two?
She had an original one. She's proposing to expand it because the opportunity came up to purchase an adjacent lot. So I view this as sort of an amendment to something we've already approved
Is that?
because of, the unforeseen circumstances that she had an extra acre to buy.
Well, and you did this because you didn't have access, true?
No, we're okay with access
Are ya?
regardless.
Kenny, I'm not sure if this is something you can think of off the top of your head, but do you know in kind of what the precedent is for developments that kind of begin the process, but then have an opportunity to expand onto neighboring land in the past? Is that something that has been considered then one development throughout the rest of the process, or has that been something that's been considered separately because they were, I guess,
So-
initiated at different times?
Kind of in light of this, I also have a little bit of a question because with the original proposal, Courtney, you're a little bit further along in the process, and as we all know, that the HDH units are limited. So my question for you is, would you be going back through and looking at this as an entirely new, like basically starting from from the beginning, because I think in our office we were looking at it as kind of a separate process for your addition. And that being said, too, you know, I was looking at where we've got approximately 160 units in the pipeline right now, and that includes your original Murphy Flats. Taking into account one other one that is we're not sure if it's going to pass yet or not. That being that Viewgate Terrace project. If that was considered, that puts us at like 328, and some of those are ahead of this addition. Not in terms of priority, just in terms of process required to get the HDH overlay. So, I mean, that would be kind of my question for Courtney. You know, we've been telling people all along that come into the office that this is a process that they kind of take on themselves, knowing that if we reach that 300 unit cap, I'm sorry, and we're not instructed to expand that in any way, then this basically has to end. So, I mean, what?
So I think it's a question of semantics, and maybe this is more on the administrative side than the planning commission, because we're already approved for the upper lot. That's done. No matter what we do with this, that one's already good to go. So I guess the way we see this one is, yes, if we are going to submit a site plan application, that's going to be both properties together.
So the HDH has to be applied to the parcel to get the densities. And in this case, it would almost be like we're looking at two different parcels, one that has the overlay approved and one that doesn't, and you're asking us to consider it as if the entire thing had the densities. And above that, consider it as if it's one parcel. So I'm a little bit confused there.
So maybe what we can do is, if we take this one through in the application that's already underway, which would be voted on by you all 2 weeks from now, hopefully, that then when we come back for site plan, we understand that the totality of the density is being proposed. I don't know.
To me, that would be cleaner. I don't know how, but you already have approval for the upper parcel. Like Kenny says, it's possible that you would not get approval for the high density overlay on the bottom parcel. Yet, we would be applying some of the requirements spread over both parcels, but only one parcel is part of the overlay. So maybe when Zachariah comes back, you can strategize with him about the best way to present it, whether you want to come up with a total new site plan and ask us to recommend approval of the overlay on the lower parcel first before you develop, before you come up with the real site plan. Or, I mean, I think Kenny brings up a really good point, and it's like, there's no way that I'm going to vote to recommend something coming later that is directly tied to a requirement for that upper development when there's a possibility it may never happen.
So just that we couldn't consider it as one development until the lower parcel has gotten official approval to have that HDHO applied to it.
Plus, they have different ownership, and different parcel numbers, so I think that
That would
that's
need to be
not
cleaned
right
up.
to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
if they would have came in together, it'd be different, but it's
Right.
two separate, and it's like trying to put another saddle on your horse that's already saddled, kind of
Well,
thing.
I have to say, I disagree with most of you on this. I think Kenny brings up a good point, which is this lower parcel might not get approved because of the cap, and we should keep that in mind. But if that happens, that's easy, right? Because we've already got an approved plan for the upper parcel, and none of the decisions or opinions we're expressing now will matter one way or the other. So we don't have to worry. So the only contingency we have to think about is suppose the lower parcel does make it under the 300-unit cap. And in that case, I think it makes sense to treat it as one parcel, and, that Jason thinks it's the same developer. If she had acquired, if the timing had been slightly different and she came in here owning both lots at the same time, we wouldn't have insisted on two separate OAO, HDH, excuse me, applications.
No, we would have combined them.
We would combine
Yeah.
them.
Yes.
And so
That's
I
not what
and-
happened.
Yeah, but
Right.
I just don't see how requiring something a few weeks later should make a big difference. And I think we get better development if we do it more holistically. I think sort of.
Well, I agree, and I'm actually recommending that she come back with a more holistic proposal,
Oh.
which includes if some of the parking requirement is going to be satisfied on that lower lot, that is shown in the proposal, so that we know exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, but I think it does make a difference on numbers, because if they're separate, then that means two fewer unit, 35 total units instead of 37, I think, if they're treated as separate parcels. I think the parking requirements are different, if they're treated together, then she's got a proposal that would meet our existing parking requirements without any,
Precisely, yeah.
and then without the lower one, then the upper thing would need some kind of, variance or extra parking spaces, one or the other. And I think the number of units that get designated as the HDH units, the 80% versus the 20%, that could come out differently if they're treated separate versus together. And so it just seemed, I think if the lower thing does get approved, I would just like to see a unified development proposal. Sounds like that was what you said too. Or?
Yeah, I'd like
Well,
to
yeah,
see
you
one holistic development proposal
You still gotta get the
for
approval.
both parcels.
Right.
First, and that's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, so
The
I-
problem is that one needs to sit there and you need to work towards getting approval on this one, and then
Right.
do because that's when you do your combined anyway, it would be combined as one, so,
Yep.
yeah. I don't,
Okay.
yeah,
So, yeah.
We'll figure it out with Zachariah, because our plan is showing that holistic thing, but then
Uh-huh.
how do we,
Well,
how do we get the approval
I
on
just don't know
what's
if there's-
shown holistically?
I just don't know if in the whole deal, if there's a rule that all of a sudden she can come back and make it bigger, you know what I mean? Or does she have to start over? I mean, that's my fear. I don't know
I think,
the
I mean,
rules.
since this is so new and we're hashing it out, that might be something that, it
we
hasn't
need to
come
have
up
Zachariah,
before,
yeah.
so that,
But I think you made a really good point, Cricket, about the title. Can we approve a,
Well, she has a ownership paper in
Yes,
there allowing
right.
that, but that's still, I just don't,
Yeah.
this is too new, and I don't wanna, we let this happen here, and then, yeah, and I mean, I'm not against it, I just don't know that it's fair to let her cut to the front of the line because she got,
well, it wouldn't be
And I don't
cutting
know,
to the front of
but
the
I don't know
line.
that, you don't know that, I don't know that, because
Right.
there's other people already in line.
Right.
And
But if
that's
one
what
of
I'm
those
saying.
didn't get approved,
But-
if whatever got delayed such that,
But my fear, like I just said, I'll be fair, and I like her project, I'm not against it or anything. I just think that we just need to make sure that we're not doing anything unethical or whatever to try to, favoritism, and I don't mean it that way. I don't want it to come across that way. I'm not saying we're doing it, I don't want it perceived that way. That's what I'm
So just to
saying.
be clear, I wasn't proposing that she should be able to cut to the
Right, I don't-
front of the line.
That's what I just didn't
I
want
was
to
just saying, if
Yeah.
she managed to, fair and square get the lower parcel approved, then
Then-
I would favor treating them as one project.
yeah.
I
me too,
agree,
me too,
yeah.
me
We're in
too.
agreement
I
there,
think
Karen.
Me
that's-
too. That the weird that's my fear is
right,
let's
but
just make sure, and then we can go from there. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
don't,
I'm not comfortable considering something
until we make sure.
holistically that might not get full approval, but if that approval were there, I think, it seems like we're mostly on the same page about that,
Yeah.
so.
Anything
hopefully
else
that-
we can clarify for you?
I think that's everything for now.
We're confused,
Okay,
so
yeah,
join
thank
us.
you.
We need some conversations with the county lawyer and with
Uh-huh.
Zachariah, and we'll figure out a path forward with that.
But-
And I really appreciate all of your input. It's really nice to be able to hear what your thoughts are and hopefully incorporate all of that into our plan.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you.
I apologize for the hearing that you attended because we really had a busy agenda, and I don't think we gave you the attention, your project or any of the projects that night, the attention that were needed. So we're going to try to cut back on the number of hearings that we have per planning commission meeting.
Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the overnight accommodations standards, I suggested to Zachariah that we have some more discussion about this, and I thought it was really good that he sent out the ordinances so we have a better understanding as to where the county stands right now on additional overnight accommodations. So unless we need some discussion about where we are with the county is with overnight accommodations, should we just jump into talking about the draft standards that Zachariah sent us?
Yeah, assuming that includes some of the issues we discussed last time about an eligibility district, discussing the possibility of that, as well as language that would guide future councils into when the overlay zone should be applied. And
Yeah.
that's something I wanted to say about
Yeah.
So, I'd just like to note that I was absent at our last meeting. So, with regards to some of the discussion that took place there, I'm not completely on top of, or completely all caught up on. I would also like to note that Nora has joined us again, and she, in reading over some of the notes from the last meeting, it looked like she was there and provided some input. So I would just like to just let you know that she's here, and she expressed to me that she was willing to offer some insight if needed as well. So
Yeah.
And the one thing I think that isn't there, I think I read it carefully enough, is on the HDHO, of course, there's a limit on the number of units overall. And I wonder, is that something that can be done with the overnight accommodations? I'll just make it up. I haven't thought this out at all. I mean, do you allow 160 units a year to be built as another way of kind of limiting the growth of, let's say, hotels, motels? I think we're thinking of maybe doing it by square footage, but that's only at a single development. So I have a concern, and we won't all share it, but a concern that a lot of people said, oh my goodness, we have enough hotel rooms. We have enough hotels. Let's stop it. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do, but if we do go with some design standards, and it works out financially for people that this is the highest value of their land, then you would think that they'll do some design standards and build a hotel. So I don't know if there's other ways of limiting the number of new units, which seems to be a problem for us.
So this came up in the early discussion around the overnight accommodations, and one fear expressed was that if you set some kind of ceiling about how many new units can be built a year, that would in reality function more as a floor. Like saying, well, gee, we should approve 160 or whatever the number is. Whereas if you didn't specify a number, then maybe some years they wouldn't approve any because we've already got a lot in the pipeline, for example.
I think I remember this argument.
So
From my point of view, the problem is, but if you just give these kinds of criterion that say, okay, these are the places where you're going to be able to do overnight accommodations, and you give the list that we have in front of us of some design standards, when will the county council turn something down that meets the, I know they've got the authority to do it. When will they actually turn it down? So that's, I do understand that argument, and then it would really be nice to have a maximum somehow with not encouraging it to be a minimum.
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up, Bob, because I was thinking about it today. Is there a way to allow additional overnight accommodations based on a percentage of rooms or percentage of campsites of the total number of non-overnight accommodation households in the county? So as additional
Like-
residences are built, you would get to a point where, okay, we're underneath that percentage of overnight accommodations versus residence bedrooms, and say, okay, now we can have 10 more, or, 50 more units, or something like that.
I think that's how liquor licenses are done, like with that philosophy, is as the population increases a certain amount. Anyway,
Maybe
I
we
think
should-
that would be really hard to figure out what that ratio would be, though. I don't
Well, I think the ratio might be difficult to decide on, but I was just thinking, well, there were a lot of people who said, not only do we have enough overnight accommodations that we don't need any more, but something should happen in the future to determine, to help make the decision that we do need some more. And I'm trying to figure out, what would that be? What would be
So I have,
an event that would happen where people are all of a sudden saying, we really could use some more new overnight accommodations?
so I have a concrete suggestion for that, which if I
Great.
finished a day earlier, I would have tried to get into the packet. So as your concern, as I understand it, Bob, is if we have this zone that can be applied, then what's to prevent the county council from just applying it all over the place, and then we're kind of back where we started. In the ordinance already, there's a sentence that reads that anyone who's applying to have the zone applied has to submit, and now I'm quoting, a clear statement of how the proposed development provides benefits to the community as compared to the development carried out, basically without the overlay zone. So we're already in the law, they have to make a case that it's better for the community to apply the overlay than it is to not apply it. And so I think and this was discussed last week, and Zach or I was thinking that could be fleshed out, and I think one straightforward way of fleshing it out is if you go through the recitals of the ordinance. So when the county passed this, they had lists of a bunch of concerns they had about the way overnight accommodations have been going. And so I just went through and found every issue that got flagged and tried to turn it into something that could be inserted into the ordinance. And so one could go on after that and say, for example, this statement that the developer submits should address, some of the following, the effect on economic diversification, the balance of tourism with other business sectors. So, if it's going to somehow help that balance rather than hurt it, that would be a reason to approve it. Creating higher paid jobs compared to not applying the overlay. Effect on crowding of national parks and other nearby public lands. Balance of new construction for overnight accommodations versus other commercial new construction. Effect on demand and prices of housing compared to not applying the overlay. Ratio of OA units to residential units, you mentioned that, and even if we don't name a hard number, we could say that should be considered so that that's getting better rather than worse. Housing prices, using our limited groundwater resources, effects on county infrastructure and resources like EMS, and the effects on traffic. So that's pretty much the issues that the council has already flagged more or less in order. And if we stuck that in the ordinance, that would be a reminder to future councils to think about all these things before approving something. And then developers, if they think that their overlay should be approved, they should be arguing that, yeah, we're going to be applying, getting some really high-paying jobs that wouldn't be available if we didn't do it this way or something like that.
Nora, how difficult would it be for the city to find out the ratio of campsites, attribute the number of people there versus hotels or B&Bs or other overnight accommodations to the number of of bedrooms or houses that are used for permanent residence, to come up with that ratio, would that be something really difficult to figure out?
Not impossible, because we have all the raw data, it's just a matter of finding it and putting it together, which of course would take some time.
Yeah.
Do you want to invite her to sit by a microphone and participate in these?
Yeah, do you,
Yeah, we're being recorded, so you might want to come up and sit down to where people can hear you, but
So we have a relatively good handle right now on the number of existing overnight accommodation units that we have and that are licensed. And some of those include some non-conforming ones from, when Airbnbs had snuck in before we didn't allow them and things like that. But we have a pretty good handle on that, and then I would assume from at least from tax information, we would be able to roughly estimate the number of permanent residents based upon whether they pay the secondary cost or whether they get the homestead exemption, the lessened tax rate. But that would probably take some doing. It may be information that we have right at our fingertips. I don't know.
I mean, I think in the recitals for the ordinance that passed, they've got the numbers, which I think are city and county combined.
I
I'm not-
believe so, and,
So,
yeah,
so it's 4525 overnight accommodation units and 3240 residential units.
3240.
That's what in July, that was the number they had.
I mean, so the numbers can be figured out. So what I was thinking is, we figure out what that percentage is, and not allow any additional overnight accommodation applications to be filed until maybe at build out. I think we're expecting 1,600. Maybe we don't. Maybe a bunch of those have already been opened, but 1,600 additional units was a number that was being thrown around a couple of months ago. And say, okay, what is the percentage of with the 1,600 additional units, and then pick a number, 5%, 10%, or something, so that there is a hard number that says when we reach this point, or not until we reach this point, will they even accept any applications.
I was just going to mention that the 2020 is going to be the census. And then you'll have really a good idea when the census is
It
complete.
takes a while for them to crunch those numbers.
Yeah, about an extra year, but still.
Certainly within a year or two of the census, we should have some good information.
Yeah, we've been over that on the study committee back and forth, so it's coming.
Yeah. So the question is, Kevin, or for all of you, would setting a number at some point in the future that until that time the ban on any additional applications applies, and at that point then the county could accept new applications?
I mean, I think it's an idea that could be considered. I wouldn't want to put all of our eggs in that basket.
No, not all.
Yeah.
Because
It's
one
just
reason
one of the
it just
design-
might not fly politically.
Hmm?
It might not fly politically. Either the county council might think that that's too rigid, or they might think that the state legislature will think it's too rigid or something, so,
I'm not worried about that.
okay. But I.
We can make recommendations, and they often don't follow our recommendations, so I've got a pretty thick skin, and I don't care. But I think, to me, it makes sense. And it kind of gets back to Bob's initial discussion.
But I think it would be equally effective just to require the county council to say that, yes, applying the override zone is going to be beneficial to the community, and specifically, it's going to help our economic diversity, it's going to help, crowding and roads and the backcountry, all this stuff, but at least isn't going to harm it. So we've already, sorry, I wasn't using the mic. We've already, at the beginning of this process, done a very good job of listing, the problems. And so I think we know what those are. And so I think in evaluating future growth in overnight accommodations, we should see whether it's making those problems worse, which is not the direction the community wants to go, or it's somehow making them better. And I imagine at first, the answer is going to be, yeah, building new OAOs is going to make it worse. So there could be some exceptions, like Zachariah last week referred to some proposal for some, some kind of crazy eco lodge, out in Dead Horse or Horse Thief Point or something like that, that would have a very high ratio of jobs to visitors or some such thing. And so, maybe things like that might get an exception, but I guess I'm just worried that rigid standards like naming a ratio, I think it would be good for guidance, but having it be like the main thing we depend on doesn't seem wise to me.
No, I was thinking of not having it be the main thing, but have it be one of the criteria,
Okay.
like the other design criteria. I've got another one to talk about.
I
Abby,
just-
did you have something?
Oh,
Go
I had
ahead.
something. I think that it's important, because I think what you're proposing is very subjective. And I think that, in a lot of similar fields, they have those indicators and standards. And so, there almost has to be some sort of numerical amount, and then, as the standard. I don't know. Some combination maybe, like I don't know. I think it would be really hard to be objective in assessing proposed new developments based solely on what you're proposing. But if we had some other sort of, maybe the ratio of what we're proposing, the ratio of residential units and nightly rentals, or the actual, ratio of jobs created versus tourists served. I don't know. Kind of.
Well, I think it's a point well taken about having these hard indicators. That's useful. I think some amount of subjectivity is unavoidable. I mean, a lot of what the county does is subjective judgments. Do we want to spend our money on improving this road, or would we rather spend it on EMS or some other thing? I mean, those are subjective things. And so the county is constantly making value judgments, and so this is no different from that. But still, I think throwing in some indicators like the one Garish proposed, or maybe some others, and I think Zachariah has thought about that in the past, that seems great too. So, but I just think we shouldn't fool ourselves that we can reduce it entirely to just a bunch of numbers.
No. So one of the comments was dealing with under the height. I thought everything was really good, try to maintain views, but it specifically talked about the area north of the Arches entrance and the need for doing some sort of analysis to determine what, if any, development should happen out there while protecting the view shed.
That's in the packet this week?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Page 63 of 64.
In the ridgeline standards,
Under height.
under height, yeah. I did note that does seem like applying the county ridgeline standards to commercial zones is sensible.
Oh, yeah. That's
That seems like a oversight almost. I mean, I think
I mean, I was, apropos of the North 191 corridor, north of the Arches entrance, I would be interested in seeing, well, let me preface that, if I think of, where do I drive around and I see buildings that blend in really well and don't kind of interrupt the view shed, and the main thing I think of is in national parks. I think they do a really good job of designing their visitor centers and putting the employee housing out of view and all that stuff. And I don't know if they have some kind of internal guidance about putting buildings within national parks, but if we had access to that, it might give us some ideas for things that could be done. So maybe staff could
in addition
see
to
if that's
having
a-
landscape architects do analysis for them, they have standards in their management plans that talk about minimizing the impact of any structures. So maybe we could tease some of that out.
Yeah.
I think the concern along the 191 corridor it's twofold. One is we're used to seeing that stretch a highway with no development, and we'd like it to stay that way. Or any development that goes in should blend in and not obstruct views, and then blend in as best as possible. So, but I see that 191 corridor as being kind of a task of its own to try to figure out.
Mhm.
And I would recommend to the council that they not approve any development plans or especially zone changes in that area until it's figured out.
Right, but I think, and I think the last zone change request there, didn't get approved by the council.
Yeah.
So we're heading down that road, but that means the pressure is on us to come up with some kind of standards
Yep.
sooner rather than later.
Yep. In our spare time.
Well, yeah, it was on our one of our suggested work list projects.
We should revisit that.
We should,
Yeah.
but then we've been a little derailed recently.
High priority things.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting under height is density and scale. Total number of accommodations not to exceed X number of units or bedrooms. And does anybody have any thoughts of, I went online today to try to find small hotels, and the only data is really for like 500 rooms and up, like there's some 6,000 room hotels in this country, believe it or not. And I was trying to think of like do we want to try to encourage more Apaches, little mom and pop type places and kick out, because of the size, probably disinterest some of the bigger hotel chains from coming into town? Or do we have any, what are the objectives there by limiting the number of units? And how is that going to be a tool for deciding whether or not to approve an overlay project?
There is the argument, I think, that if you allow only smaller units, they'll be more dispersed throughout the community, which some people might think it's better to have larger concentrated hotels. I don't agree with that personally. I think that a lot of the feedback that we got from people was not, I didn't hear anyone complain about any of the existing hotels that are Apache hotel size, or, the complaints and the fears were all seem to be mostly driven by these really large developments that once they start getting built, it's like, oh wow, there's a ton happening there. So I think that it seems like there would be support for having some kind of cap to number of rooms or size.
Yeah, one thing that got thrown around during the scoping was like 50 rooms. I don't know if that's the right number, but I remember hearing it from a few different people.
Yeah, I don't know what the number.
And I think another argument, which I think I've heard a few people make, but I'll attribute it to Curtis Wells, is that the smaller units are more likely to provide opportunities, for local entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so, I maybe it's a little bit unfair, but as in a county, we might, kind of be parochial and try to think, well, people who live in Graham County, they're the ones who should be making money, off of that, and it's easier for people here to do it on small developments rather than huge ones. So.
But I think it's
Nora actually, I think, works a bit on this too.
Yeah, and we had a sort of a similar discussion with our planning commission 2 weeks ago. And it was a very similar discussion that most of the sort of mom and pop ones are owned by locals and they're smaller, and that's something that we certainly don't want to discourage, and that really the reason that we're looking at limitation on size and numbers of rooms or square footage is the scale issue, in terms of mass and appearance, but also just in terms of, the corporate versus non-corporate. And you can't say, it's against the law, to say we don't want these corporate brands, but you can control it by minimizing, by having a cap on the square footage or the number of units. And I think the direction that the city is probably heading is because we're doing it by zone. Certainly in our, like in the middle of town where we have commercial zoning, which might allow hotels, we would require a lot of mixed use. And then smaller, for sure, maybe it's 10 rooms in some cases, or 20 units or whatever. And I did some analysis, which I didn't bring with me and I should have, of some of the hotels that have been recently built and how big they are, so that we could kind of get a handle on scale, and I was going to talk to the planning commission about that tomorrow. For example, like a basic like Hampton Inn, or one of the kind of the boxes that aren't huge. Those are generally around 30,000 square feet. And then there's sort of another set that's about 30 to 60,000 square feet. So, in the industry, there are kinds of sort of cutoffs with the type of unit and the size of project they have. But certainly in terms of scale, 30,000 square feet is not unusual for the smaller type little hotel. And then, you get all different ranges above that. And so I think from my perspective, it's really, there are two goals. One is to try to encourage smaller projects that local folks might be able to embark upon. And two, to just deal with the visual mass and scale, and overall traffic effect and everything else. So I had the same question of the planning commission. On a piece of property, do you want to limit the overall total square footage, or do we just want to limit how much is in each building from a massing standpoint? And I think they're kind of leaning toward both a little bit, and possibly based on parcel size.
And Nora, how many units are typically in 30,000 square feet?
Oh, gosh. I think the latest one we reviewed was Moab My Place, which is about to start construction. And I think they were 60 rooms. So, kind of the smaller footprint. But I can get more information to you, because I have to, tomorrow I was going to gather that all up for our planning commission, so I can send it to Kenny and to
That
So-
would be great.
The choices we have in our packet are number of units or bedrooms. Do you think that's a good way to try to box in the impact, or is it simpler or better for some reason to go with total square footage?
When you come to units or bedrooms, that's certainly one way to do it, and I think what you need to have is some kind of a conversion factor, because some rooms are going to be 500 square feet, some are going to be 175 square feet, and that affects the mass of the building. So I have worked other places where we have what was called the unit equivalent, which gets confusing with our various sewer and water and stuff like that, equivalent units and stuff like that. But so a unit equivalent equals like a hotel room that's less than 500 square feet would be 0.25 of that unit equivalent. So you have some way to actually get a handle on mass. Or you could deal with total square footage. That choice is totally, it's a policy decision, and it can be done either way. Total square footage kind of gets at the entire mass, which is probably more direct. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that there's enough room for those mixed uses that we may be requiring on the first floor.
Yeah, I can see going with total square footage. It depending on what the goals are. If the goals are to limit the amount of congestion in Moab, or the wait time to get into Arches National Park. If it were strictly a size limitation, somebody might build a hotel with 125 square foot rooms and just cram a lot more into them.
Sure.
Or make it more like a hostel, with, you have a bedroom and a shared bath. I don't know, but just to cram more people into it. So I think maybe, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking that maybe both a limitation in the number of bedrooms and a limit on the size might be more effective.
Yeah, I think they're addressing slightly different concerns, and I think it's important to have two separate limits, one on the number of rooms and one on how bulky the building is.
How about condominium units and campgrounds? Say the council gets two proposals. One is for a 50-site campground, and the other is for a 150-room hotel or 70-unit condominium that will all be used for overnight accommodations. How do you tease out the merits or the impacts of one versus the other?
Well, I don't think we have to make direct comparisons unless we want to somehow, this is going off a little bit on a tangent, and I'll come back to your question, but, maybe these applications for the zones should only be considered quarterly or something, and then, they'll have a bunch of proposals in front of them, and they can choose the ones that do the best job of providing benefits to the community, whatever. In that case, you might be making a choice between a campground and a condo unit. So just wanted to throw that idea out there. I think campgrounds can go away quickly, right? There's not a lot of investment there, and if someone decides they want to do something else on that land, that's very realistic. Whereas I think hotels, it's pretty difficult to convert them into anything other than a hotel in the future. I've seen hotels converted to condos or residential apartments in Aspen, but it's kind of a strange development. And I think the condos, can little bits at a time, they can be bought, converted into residential units. If it's the right kind of development that people would actually want to live in. And we've already, Rim Village, for example, that's got a pretty good mix of permanent residents and, overnight accommodations.
Does it?
I think it's probably at least 20-25% for
Full-
tax, at least people who are claiming it for tax purposes
As a residence?
Garish, I believe, correct, I believe that the, beings that we have 3 different overnight accommodation overlays, that could be specific to whatever is being proposed.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't
that-
saying include
Okay.
the standards for campgrounds being the same as standards for hotels. I was saying,
Okay. Okay.
I just don't want to lose sight of, we've got other types of overnight accommodations than hotels that we might want to look at.
So something I would love to see on, discuss more or on the agenda in the future is also this overlay eligibility district. It's got a mention in this week's packet. But I do think, this was discussed in the early part of the scoping for the new OA policy. And then the idea was, well, maybe north of town is a better place for future hotel development than south of town. And I think that for a while that was like the leading option. Then a lot of people just didn't like thinking about any new hotels anywhere. And so, this option 5 was created, and that's what got adopted in the short term. But I think now we're in danger of sort of sliding back from this option 5, which is supposed to be stronger than the old option 4, into something that looks more like option 3. Sorry to throw out all these numbers, but I assume you all remember what they refer to. And so option 3, you were sort of allowing new developments, throughout the valley. And that, I think, was not very popular, but that's where we're headed unless we put these overlay eligibility districts back on the table. So.
Add to the map that's included in the packet.
Yeah, or go back to there were some district boundaries that were proposed. Nor what is the city at all considering that? Or are you going to be, what road are you headed
We're
down?
considering development standards by zone. So our north end of town is all RC, or, so that those that are resort commercial. So the resort commercial would likely have some different development standards in terms of size and bulk and all those kinds of things than the stuff in town, which is in a commercial zone, a C3 or a C4.
But are some of the zones that, which formerly allowed, which 2 years ago allowed overnight accommodations, is it under discussion that in the future they just won't allow them at all?
Yes, that's
Okay.
definitely.
Okay, so it might just be just the RC zone or the RC zone and one other or something?
I think in the inner city areas, what we're talking about is allowing a certain number of overnight accommodations if it's part of a mixed-use project. So maybe in the area where there are already the Entrada and a lot of the existing overnight accommodations, which are a mix actually of permanent and overnight accommodation, to allow, so there are some small parcels there. So if you have a parcel that's under a certain size, you can do a maximum of 2 overnight accommodations on the second floor, but there have to be, it has to be commercial on the bottom floor and that kind of stuff. So I think there is some discussion about allowing some more limited if it's in association with a commercial use that is beneficial to the community as a whole. So not just tourists, but also people who live there. But the larger numbers would probably be on the north end. And again, we want to make sure we break up the mass, so we're not getting a big, huge thing. And there was pretty strong feedback from the planning commission that a project as big as the World's Mark right now that's under construction, that great big huge thing as you come into town, that they're not really interested in a project that big again, necessarily. At least that's the input I'm getting from the planning commission now. I don't know about the city council. I suspect they're in a similar,
So is the city considering any way of controlling the pace of new development? Or are they just going to grant a bunch of uses by right and then it's up to developers how quickly that all gets built?
Well, metering in that, we probably won't be live with all of our development standards for each zone at one time.
I see.
So, and maybe we never, but I think there is some discussion that we need to have, probably with both planning commissions and city council and councils about whether we want to do a metering like a total number of units or total amount of square feet per year, or whether that's an approach that we want to take. We haven't really discussed that much, but I suspect the city council may be interested in having that discussion.
Thanks.
We still have a meeting with the county council next week, or on the
October 2nd.
October 2nd. And hopefully you can come join in. I would like to have, after that meeting, and we get some, hopefully some clear direction of what approach we should take to some of the outstanding controls that maybe we could have a joint meeting with the town, with the city's planning commission, just to kind of share, have it facilitated in some fashion, and have some discussion points, because I think eventually most of Grand County is going to be City of Moab, or most of Spanish, and we might as well be in alignment as best we can with what the city is going to want to manage, how they want to manage. So,
Yeah, I think,
and I don't know if would be a problem if your planning commission met on a Tuesday night with us, or we changed our meeting date to coincide with the cities, but I'd be up for looking at either of those options too.
our planning commission is totally up for that. In fact, I think they would appreciate that. We also have a joint meeting with our city council maybe next week. And so that's a good time for us and the planning commission to get a sense for what they're thinking on, just sort of the parameters that we've set forth here. And then I think that would help the planning commission refine a little bit what they need to work on. I expect it's the same with you guys.
Yep.
But then I think the next step, it would be really beneficial to try to have a joint planning commission meetings with the two parties. And I can work with Kenny on trying to put something together.
Great.
special meetings or come to your meeting or whatever. Tuesday nights, again, are a conflict for me because it's often city council, but,
That's why
What do you
Zachariah
do?
wanted it tonight. So he could be here and then go there.
well, today, for example, I didn't have any items on the agenda, so. It's the exception, other than the rule.
I think we're going to be leaning on you and Zachariah pretty heavily to help guide us through a reasonable course so that we can eventually make some good recommendations to our council.
Yeah, I think we need to come up with sort of a decision tree, just kind of walk us through if this, then what. The other thing that our planning commission talked about at their last meeting is, in terms of development standards, and I think you guys talked about it last time as well, and Zachariah mentioned it, was having must-dos and then having, it would be great if you could, but you have to do a combination of a certain number of the wants, and so kind of setting it up like that. So I think we're on the same page there. I think the big discussion points, it sounds like, is like, do we want to meter development, and if so, how do we do that? Do we do it just by mass, or do we do it by limiting the number of units or amount of square footage per year? Do we want to look at? That's a big discussion.
Just to be clear, what I was suggesting is we don't even accept applications for new overnight accommodations until some target is met.
Right, and the city is not going to do that. I can tell you that right now, probably, just because of the ongoing discussions that we're having with the state legislature.
Well,
And
if the
we
city's
just-
not going to do it, the county's probably not either, but I still think it's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Don't
you
give up.
guys,
I wouldn't give up so quickly.
and I don't know where our council will ultimately come down, but we have had a lot of discussions with state legislature and have tried to assure them that we're not shutting overnight accommodations down completely, that we're working on it. And that seems to satisfy that until now. If we come in and say, well, we're not going to accept new applications until these 1,500 units are already built, I think they would, that runs the risk of the state getting involved. And I know we don't want to be under that threat all the time. We don't want to plan according to that. But it is a reality. And the danger that we have is that if we screw something up, it could screw it up for the rest of the state. Because they'd likely say something like, local jurisdictions can no longer limit the total square footage of hotel projects or something like that. So we need to tread a little bit carefully. But I think the city will be poised to approve something to allow new overnight accommodation projects to be submitted somewhere in Moab in the first part, by the first part of the year. It could be one zone, but somewhere.
Well, my feeling is that I'm not a politician, and I'm not paid, and I don't have an appointed office, not a elected office. And I try to come up with ideas that I think would work best. And so I'm not too worried about I don't consider the politics. I know that's there.
And that's
But-
your privilege.
Yeah.
That's
So
what's,
that's
that's what's great about planning commissions.
that. All we do is make recommendations to the politicians, and they need to have their finger on that pulse.
Although it is a good reason to have a range of recommendations. This ratio, pulling things out of the whereas type statements. And of course, I guess we'll get a lot of that on the second. We'll lay out a lot of stuff and see if there's some they just think are ridiculous, or others they say, see if you can flesh them out. Be a good meeting.
So, at the beginning of this agenda item in the packet, it says, staff requests the planning commission provide clear direction to the staff on the proposed development standards, et cetera, ahead of October 2nd. So I'm just wondering if we can summarize our clear direction, to pass on to staff. So I get the impression that most of us are pretty much okay with the actual development standards that are listed in the table. I didn't hear a lot of complaints about those.
I just had a question about those. So if, so how does this, how are campgrounds affected by this? So civic space,
So the civic space one is also one that the planning commission, it's a little squishy. And so we're talking about, does that really work for smaller projects? I don't know if it does or not, and what does that really mean? So we need to flesh that out more for sure. We haven't really talked about campgrounds.
Okay, so maybe not enough attention has been paid to campgrounds in this table, and we need to find some things that are more specific. I also think it might make sense to have different rules for expansions versus new developments. Because I think some things might be very practical for something that's just breaking ground and be kind of impractical for, adding an addition or something like that. I mean, some of these might apply to both, but it's something we should think of because I think a lot of the new construction might be expansions of existing developments rather than brand new things in the future.
One thing that I think was missed under materials and colors is how reflective exteriors are. So I think we should suggest that we include something about that.
Is Kenny-
We also had the comment that we don't want so much glass if it's the beacon on the hill. Where
Yeah.
it's interior lighting, but it becomes, so that's a good.
A funny add to that is I do those trails on Hell's Revenge, and we come out of this canyon, and my people stopped me and said, "Where's that restaurant?" I'm like, "What restaurant?" "Well, see, that's all lit up." I'm going to keep watching, and then the moon came over the hill. But it was crested, perfect, and they were certain that there was a restaurant on the
Just
hill.
wait.
I go, "Just keep watching; it'll change real soon." And then the moon came up, and they couldn't believe it. But that's kind of what that deal is like that.
So one other thing that came up was considering overlay zones instead of standards that would apply to entire zones. Is that right? Or
Well, I think that's the main,
that's like,
that's the road the county's headed down. The city
Right.
seems to be different.
and the city's doing
And
it
it's
slightly
fine,
different.
we can still have someone
Mhm.
on the standards, and I understand why the county is choosing to go that way. It's equally as good an approach, it's different.
So my sense is that we're leaning towards the overlay not include the highway commercial zone south of Moab. Is that,
That's what I think.
So
I mean-
can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
that we would not map a proposed overlay south of Moab along the highway commercial zone?
So is another way of saying that we would designate an overlay eligibility district which would not include South 191. It might include areas north of the city limits. Or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think I would certainly like to see that on the table. And I think something like that got a fair amount of support in the early scoping. It's called option 4.
And I hope we can get some clarification from the council as to what, if anything, they would like done as far as planning up around 313.
And then I think something else, there's, on the subject of clear direction to staff, I think some of these ideas about, guiding when the overlay zone would be applied, and, Garish had some ideas about ratios and hard numbers, and I had this idea of just a list of things to consider that tracks the whereases from the resolution, but I think something of that, I'm certainly interested in seeing something of that sort in there. Just to make it clear that it's not, we're just not going to apply this willy-nilly, that the council should be applying the overlay zone if it's beneficial for the community and not otherwise. So,
Or maybe you can answer this question, but under materials and colors section, it talks about primary materials. Do you know what that is? What is a primary material?
So it would be, I forget what this says actually. Materials and colors. Primary facade materials. So that basically means the majority of the building. And it's saying 80% of each facade shall be constructed of primary materials for facades over 100 square feet. More than one material shall be used. So that just says you can use one material if you're under 100 square feet, or if you're more than that, you have to meet the 80% requirement. And then the primary materials would include and be limited to, not necessarily limited to, but primary facilities would be high quality, durable, natural materials. So what we don't necessarily want to see is the primary wall material being something that's not long-lasting. So we would want to make sure that that primary material is stone, brick, adobe type materials, wood lap siding, fiber cement board, shingle, out, or panels, metal siding, and glass.
So when you say adobe-like, do you mean stucco?
Real stucco would be okay. We'd have a limitation on the amount of the exterior insulation and finishing systems, or EIFS. And the reason that we have that, and state-of-the-art with building materials changes all the time, so we may not want to specify that product individually, but a lot of people, Salt Lake, a lot of the buildings in Salt Lake have that product as their kind of primary material, and it's falling apart already. So it's a durability issue, especially when we're talking about freeze-thaw cycles. It's not a big deal in Southern California or LA, or lots of other places where they use lots of it, but it's a lot trickier here. So certainly it's fine as an accent, but we don't want that kind of material to be the primary material on a building because it just doesn't last.
Are you talking stucco specifically?
Yeah, it's like that stucco. It's a stucco material that has some insulation value as well.
Because when I think of adobe-like, I think of really fine mud,
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think we want too many of our buildings to basically dissolve in a rainstorm.
No. Nor would they want to either.
Yeah. I was just
they're-
trying to figure out an idea of what adobe-like means. It kind of means, it could mean some stuccos
Yeah.
if it was durable.
If it was, if it was a real durable stucco product. And I think we would include language that says, we'd be willing to consider other materials because, like I said, the state-of-the-art changes constantly on these things. And it may be that this EIFS system, eventually they get it better. They make it right so that it's not as much of an issue. We'd still want a mix of materials, for sure, a mix of colors and stuff like that.
So do we have anything else to say?
Anything that's missing?
No, I don't.
Thank you for your input. Every little bit helps.
Yeah, thank you for
Well, thank you.
coming
Yeah.
here and joining the discussion.
My pleasure.
Very helpful.
And so your joint meeting is October 2nd?
Yep.
Yeah,
At
2 p.m. I assume it's here. Do you know, Kenny?
I do not.
I
Okay,
assume it's here.
cool.
Yeah.
If it's not here, let us know where to show up.
We'll be there.
What day of the week is that?
It's a Wednesday.
Wednesday.
That's what I thought, but then I thought.
Yeah.
So it's next Wednesday at 2 p.m. someplace in Moab.
In Moab.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Moab. Or in Grant County somewhere.
Does anybody have anything under future considerations that we should be thinking about for the upcoming months? Terry Morris is not here, so what do you guys want to do now?
Adjournment?
Second.
Okay. Done.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nora.
Thank you, Nora. All right. Thank you.
Did you get that, Kenny?
I think so. Was that Abby Scott?
Yes.
Bob said
All right.
Very quickly.
quickly, he said exactly, great idea, in different words, but same.
Really good thinking there, Bob.
Same sentence.
Really good thinking. Adjournment.
I learned that in our committee meeting, when somebody was, when we were having that study committee, and go on with, say it, and I think, I don't even want to repeat that, I was so moved.